Thank you very much, Olivia. It is my pleasure to be here with you today. And well, we hope to have a lively debate. We will be very pleased to listen to your interventions also. But let's start, first of all, with Aurelia Mania. And then we will follow with the first reaction by Gonzalo. And then we can open the floor for a lively debate and intervention.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, Carmen. And yes, I will start, of course, thanking Casa Árabe and Olivia Orozco for her invitation to participate in such seminar. Yesterday I was here talking about Algeria. Today I'm here talking about Middle Eastern oil. I hope I will not swap the talks, but anyhow, I thank again, and also I'm thankful. Sorry, we have a small technical problem. So yeah, I was saying that I want to thank also Gonzalo and Carmen for being my chair and discussion. And also I want to thank all of you, but especially Casa Árabe and Olivia on behalf of the Centre Capmany of the University of Barcelona, since I think it's the first institutional collaboration that we have. And I do hope it will be a long-standing one, so that's the beginning of a friendship. I hope so. And I would like also to signal that I'm here by my own, but this presentation that I will show you, I will discuss with you, is the result of a collaboration within Elvira Sanchez Mateos, who unfortunately, because of some family and health matters, is not here, but she would like, I think she is connected online, so maybe she will participate, but she's not here amidst us. And of course, if you have any question, you can also address to her. But if there is any mistakes, of course, it's my own, it's not hers. Okay, I will start with the presentation. And I start when this PowerPoint with the photo that Olivia already mentioned. This is the photo of the, well, yeah. Well, in any case, it's the same photo. It's the photo of the I don't know if it's the only one and the official one, but in any case of the Cairo Conference. And I chose it because one of the things that Olivia had already said, that because here, well, you don't see, I imagine, but this is the only woman which is here, and she's Gertrude Bell. And it was not much of that in my presentation, but Carmen told me last week, you have to talk about Gertrude Bell. I didn't know what to say, so I put the picture at least. But what I have to say is that she's not just, she was the only woman here, but probably she was the one who most actively, at least with Lawrence, who were participating in the drawing of the borders of the Middle East and Iraq. And I have to say that sadly, she's not as much remembered as he is. And we were talking with Carmen and Olivia also that the only film that they shot about her is an awful biopic, and nothing it's, well, you cannot even compare to the such wonderful movie which is Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, if you put one side and another, I mean, there's no sense. And last but not least, I mean, I have to mention also that Olivia told me, I didn't know it, but she told me yesterday that she sadly committed suicide just a few months later of the Cairo Conference. So, yeah, so well, I don't know why, but I wonder why. Maybe she was not very happy with what had happened with all the borders in the Middle East. So I think that it's not a nice, because it's a sad story, but a nice way of starting what I will share with you. Okay, since this is not this conference by itself, it's not exactly part of Aula Árabe, but everything is happening within the framework of Aula Árabe, and I assume there are some students, master or PhD students watching us. Well, maybe some of you are master and PhD students, but others who are online. So I would start this presentation in a non-usual way and saying that this is the result of, here I put because it's nicely an unpublished and published paper, but actually it was a rejected paper, okay? My own rejected paper that I had been working for the last 3 years. But I mean, if I have to share something with you, is that the reviewers, I don't think they were fair, but at least they say two things that were relevant. One is that I have to clarify, and we will see why, what I understand for international oil industry, okay? So I decided that I have to better define it, better to find it, what I was meaning when I was talking about international, okay? And the second one, because I wasn't aware, and that I thank to the reviewer or who told me, is that I have to address more the influence of the Young Turks and in the creation of the Turkish Petroleum Company and in the creation of the Turkey at this moment. And I think this is a very good contribution because I think it will nuance better which were my thoughts. So because of that, I asked also help because I thought I was not able to do it by my own. That's why Elvira also, I talked to Elvira, she's helping, well, we are working together, it's not that she's helping me. And we start revisiting this conflictive process that led to the making of international industry and through the establishment of a new international principle, which were the mandates. That's what I will try to present here. And I hope with the conclusions, which are more than provisional, but still it's what we have up to now, I think maybe that will emerge some new ideas for the research on political economy agenda in the region. So I would start with at least what it was the main content of this rejected paper. This rejected paper was to show something which are the most interesting omissions of this agreement. This is what it is shown in the British National and the National Archive, the British National Archives. This is an agreement which is the agreement of March 1914. It's quite well known for all historians, also for the historians of the region, but also being very, very, I think, very relevant and important because at the end of the day, it's the foundation of the international oil regime, and probably it's the foundation of this new international vision, at least the borders, it's the basis of the borders were there. As I will show you, there are really these omissions that I will tell you which ones are. For me, it's like the evidence that something very weird, strange was happening at this moment. And this is the evidence of the conflictive process that at the end of the day, it leads to the creation of the international regime of the Seven Sisters and probably the borders of Iraq and therefore the Middle East. So that is my point. So why it's so important and it's worthwhile to revisit such agreement, because as it is said, it is the basis, or it was the basis on which the Turkish Petroleum Company, the one which was created during the Ottoman Empire by Gulbenkian, probably like a hybrid of British and Turkish interests. But this agreement were the basis of all the concessions, you see, which later on were established in the Middle East. So it could be considered, and I consider it as the basis of what were the concession of the Middle East, the birth of the oil in the Middle East, and probably of such borders. So that's why I think it was worth to revisit this paper. So what I was saying is which are the emissions. I would not explain all of them, but I just want to show you that there were some emissions, and those omissions are important because, well, you don't see well. This is the handwritten addendum, which were in the original of this document, and this original apparently it was Calouste Gulbenkian who wrote it. Maybe it was, maybe not. It's not important, but what is relevant is that in some way this is a primitive form or germ of what it will be known like the red line agreement. You have here the map of the red line, and the red line agreement says that an international consortia of oil companies will be just themselves exploiting the oil which may be found within the borders of the Middle East. So this is what afterwards happens with the Cartel of the Seven Sisters, and that's why, I mean, such big omissions in a such relevant document is something that at some point for me means that something was happening there. And what is most striking, and I'm going to the missions, is that this is the Turkey arrangement for the petroleum concessions in the Ottoman Empire, but neither the Turkish Petroleum Company nor the RC Group, which was the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which was the previous company which became the Anglo-Iranian Company, and then British Petroleum, none of them were at this moment granted by such concessions. So what is, well, I don't know if it's funny or it's sad or what is it, but it's something, is that this is, all this document was for a merging of concessions which were not yet granted at this period. But still, this concession, what it's written here is what it remains. So this is why I think it's quite relevant. So there are other things which are quite, well, I don't think you see it, but here is the signature of the member of the British government, Her Majesty government, but it does not say here that it's signed on behalf of the Her Majesty government, but the German it is. So there are plenty of things here which are not what it should be, let's put it this way, in this kind of document. So what for me was relevant is this idea that this is because behind the signing, well, not just the signing, the making and all the process of this document, there was something which was a conflictive process. So what we'll try to explain here is which was this conflictive process, okay? For methodological and practical reasons, we decided to split this process into ones. The first one, which is it's a conflictive process period one, is the one that lasts from the creation of the Turkish Petroleum Company, the one I already mentioned, the one of Gulbenkian, up to the signing of this agreement. At this year also many things happening. It was when the British government bought the 51% of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. It was also the same year that the Royal Navy signed this agreement for oil with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Even this oil was not existent at this moment either. So all of these were things which are a bit strange, but it ends in 1918 in the aftermath of the First World War, when in some way before the peace conference, the British bought all the shares of the Turkish Petroleum Company and went to Paris to the peace conference. So this is the first conflictive period, but that I will explain a bit here. Well, I will mention, but what we will focus here today is in the second part of the conflictive period, which is this one. This one, it starts in 1916, that of course it overlaps with the other one, but 1916, as probably most of you already know, is the signing of the Sykes-Pico agreement. The Sykes-Pico agreement is this agreement that the British and the French signed in 1916, thinking already that the territories of the Ottoman Empire will be spoils of war. And in some way they were sharing, well, in some way they share these territories. And from there, from what we think, that there starts 4 years later a parallel process, a parallel which communicates. It's not a parallel that they don't touch. Well, even parallel means that don't touch, and it happens at the same time, but they were communicating one and the other. And it's for this is for the oil. It starts in San Remo, where again the British and the French tried to correct what they had signed in the Sykes-Pico agreement, taking into account the oil interests, and they decided there that even they don't know yet how many oil was in the Ottoman Empire, whatever this oil will be, they will share between the British and the French in the proportion of 75% for the British, 25% for the French. That was also the birth of La Compagnie Française de Pétrole. That means what nowadays is Total. So that was the beginning also of the French in oil. Okay, this was this San Remo, and this leads, I will show, well, I will just mention up to the 1988, which is where the Red Line Agreement was already really set, and the Agna Carney Agreement, which was a market, how they will share the market also. And this is the birth of these seven sisters. At the same time, parallelly, this is the mandates. That is what we will be talking today. The Cairo Conference, which is the seminar is focused on the Cairo Conference. So I will stop here, but I would not, just to show you that those two processes are here parallel. And as after the Cairo Conference, there is this treaty with the King Faisal and the British government. Then it goes and there is an agreement between the oil companies and the government of Iraq. Then there is the problem of the borders. Then the borders are set. Then there is the agreement with the seven sisters. So this is some kind of interacting all the time, while there are maybe two different tracks. But today, as I say, I will focus in this period. So just to let you know what happened in the first phase, in the first period. In this first period, as I say, is here. It starts in 1912. It ends in 1918. And just what I want to signal here, what for me is relevant of this period, is which is the conflict here. The conflict is between imperial ideology, the British imperial ideology, in all ways of this imperial ideology. On the paper, in the paper, it was just this idea of imperial geography, Mackinder. This is Persia. Also, this is part also of the big game, and also what I call the imperial energy ideology, which is grounded on Gibbons, on coal, but this is the idea that the supremacy and hegemony of countries are because of the control or the ownership of coal at this time and oil on the other time. So this is this imperial British ideology which is here, which clash with this emerging Turkish ideology of the young Turks. Well, maybe Carmen will after discuss myself this, but with the young Turks, which in some way they are talking another language, having other wishes, and what they want is to create, a national economy within the borders of the new Turkey. And my thought is that this was something that the British were not able to deal with because they were not really understanding what was happening here. So as a matter of fact, for instance, in the archives, there is a sentence in the Lausanne Conference where Lord Curzon say, but what are they saying? No, they are the losers of the war. We are the ones who will decide about the territory. They don't have, but it was not they don't have the right to do it. It's what they talking about? You know, this idea of non-understanding of what was happening. So I think this is one of the parts of this the conflict, the previous conflict. Why this document is a bit strange, because Gulbenkian was talking. He was British, but at the same time sponsoring, patronizing the Ottomans and the Turks, and the others that were just, this is ours and we will take it. So this is the first part. But what for me, it's, well, this is, I think it's quite relevant, but for me what is more relevant today is this second part. The second part is what happened in the 1920s, okay? This very beginning, which is the link between the title, which is territory, mandates, border, and state. So I will try to illustrate this. As I told you, it's in 1920, there is San Remo, that is this sharing, imperial sharing between the French and the British about the oil. And then it's the United States that, as you already know, was on the First World War. After the war, there is the open door principle of Wilson, and saying, okay, we are changing, we are thinking different. We think that the equal rights, everyone has the right to be there, no imperialism, and so on. And a nice piece to illustrate that is this correspondence between the American ambassador in London at this time and Lord Curzon about the mandates and the oil in Mesopotamia. Okay, so what I think is sorry, this is a much more complex story of what I have already told, but I think that what is interesting here is that the United States, or at least the American ambassador and the Secretary of State, the both of them are here, grounded on the principles of the open door. What they are saying at some point is that well, you have here. Sorry, I just maybe it's better. I show you that they say, okay, well, there is the treaties of peace. There is no exclusive economic concessions. So what they say is that, okay, the administrative arrangements is what they see is the oil deposits in Mesopotamia will be secured through the future Arab state. That's what the British say. Okay, they were thinking that this oil deposit, that at the end there will be some kind of Arab state there to secure these oil deposits. But what they are saying, the Americans, is that there are these oil deposits, but we create the mandates. The mandates are a new principle, and the oil, the resources of Mesopotamia, will be an outstanding illustration of for what the mandate principle were designed. So they were saying, okay, just the mandates, they were designing for things like the oil in Mesopotamia. So this idea is like, in some way, what they were saying is we are creating an international regime for to assure that everyone is able to go to this country. There is this oil there, and what is created is that we will try to preserve it for this future Arab state. So in this way, what I'm trying to say is that the mandates principle is like a transitional regime from the Ottoman Empire to the Arab state that will be the one which will be able to grant the concessions. Sorry, I did a bit of a mess, but this was the idea. The idea is that they started a correspondence. What that is helping us to is the link with Mesopotamian oil, the enlightened principles of the mandates, and those mandates as a transitional international regime to secure the Arab states and the concessions. So this was the idea. So what for me this is relevant is that this correspondence allows us to make a link between Mesopotamian oil mandates and the future Arab state. That was what I was trying to say. Sorry, I did a bit of a mess, but this was what I was trying to say. So my idea here is that in some ways the mandates were necessary for this transitional regime, but as I will explain later or say later, this Arab state was needed to grant at the end of the day the concessions to some company. So that's my idea here. And also the idea that there are some kind of enlightened principles that will be better than the other ones, and they will be the ones that will make some kind of rational organization of the oil industry and of those territories that at some point were part of the Ottoman Empire. So this is this idea that I think here it's quite interesting, even if I expressed it badly at this point. But what it was interesting is this link between this international regime, which are the mandates, the Mesopotamian oil fields, and in some way the conflict between the United States saying, okay, this is the open door, everyone has the right to be there, and the imperial ideology of the British. So this is what for me makes this link and also justifies the title of this paper. And what we were looking for, so which were those enlightened principles, which were the principles of the mandates. So there is, and well, I don't know if you have read, I talked to everyone to this book that is Jessica White, which is called The Morals of the Market. And on this book, I found the clue a bit on this idea, because she talks about it's the morals of the market. It talks how neoliberalism, Hayek, and the Mont Pelerin society mostly influenced the thought towards the third world. That's more or less. So she writes about William Rappert. I have to say, 1 year ago or 2 years ago, I didn't even know who William Rappert was. I'm an economist and I didn't know it. And this is as I don't know to whom I was telling the other day, but this is one of the good things of the pandemic, that at least I read a bit more than I used to, at least for the last years. And I read this book. And so we went to the archive of the League of Nations, because William Rappert was an outstanding, not just Mont Pelerin society, but he's the ideologist of the economic part of the mandate. And the evidence of that is that the World Trade Organization, its main building, it's called Centre William Rappert. So he's still someone very well known on the neoliberal thought, let's put it this way, but he was the one who was writing the economic side of the mandate. So on this paper, which is on the Journal of British Institute of International Affairs of 1925, what William Rappert explains about the mandate system, okay? There's just some highlights here, but she says, okay, the mandates are an international regime, but really they are entirely Anglo-Saxon. So the idea of international, that's what I was looking for from this point of view, is they were completely Anglo-Saxon, no? And they are resulting from the Wilson 14 points, so what I was telling, and they are to deal with, for instance, of course, the German, African, but the Arab territories of the Ottoman Empire. So this international Anglo-Saxon regime in some way was made for dealing with this part of the world. So, and she say, of course, they are not a territorial, because this is the idea at this period, and this is also the non-agreement between the Americans and the British, because the British understands these spoils of war as territorial. And at this point, what they were saying, the Americans, is no, there is not a territorial spoil of war. There is something that different and they will be free or not free, but the mandatory powers are a trust of civilization. As a matter of fact, the mandatories were a trustees for civilization. Of course, here civilization means a very concrete thing. It's Western, Greco-Latin civilization. This is the only way which is it. So this is what they are for. So they are grounded on the principle of that well-being and development. I would not talk today about development, but it's also very interesting because it's also, I think it's also the beginning of this idea of policies of development, which were not existing before. And what for me it's more relevant here is that they say they are a promising experiment. So the mandates, which remember the last slide, were to deal for the oils in Mesopotamia and so on, were a promising experiment. And in some way, for capitalism to get into these territories. And which is more interesting, well, but that's more methodological, if you like it, is what that they are the natural outcome of historical experience. So some kind of natural law with comes to the mandates, and they have the desire to eliminate the political factor. Sorry, they are judicial. So what they are saying is they are not political. There is this idea of non-territorial. There are a promising experiment for getting the capitalism. Well, which capitalism? And that's the point. I think it's the Anglo-Saxon capitalism. It's not because this idea of international, it's Anglo-Saxon. So that was the idea. And what is quite funny also is that in the same archive, here is the Manchester Guardian, which of course it's at this point is on the other ideological side of what William Rappert could be, because it's labor, and in the 20s the Manchester Guardian was much more even labor, which is now. But what is interesting that they are talking about the mandates, and what they say is we may change our metaphor and compare the inefficient country to a vacuum. So what they are saying at some point is that this area is a vacuum. And my point here, if I put the two documents together, is that this is a vacuum to be filled by oil or to be filled by capitalism. So that's a bit what I mean. There are just ideas. I mean, it's not so well articulated everything, but for me there is a narrative to follow, and that's why I was saying here at some point there are more more preliminary, and I would say preliminary conclusions than real conclusions. But for all the things that I had been talking about, my idea is much more concrete, that bearing in mind the conflict between the Ottoman and the British may help to better analyze the emergence of the oil industry in the Middle East. I think this is a very concrete thing. Also, bearing in mind the conflict between the British imperial ideology and the American Wilsonian liberalism, the one that we had been seeing in the 20s, I think also may help to understand better the emergence of the oil industry in the Middle East, okay? So this idea also of the mandates as a new, neither political nor territorial Anglo-Saxon international system, that at the end of the day, and that's just an hypothesis at this stage, but it legitimizes the entry of the Anglo-Saxon oil companies in the Middle East, and therefore it legitimated to suggest that the type of international seven sister regime that came into being at the time is an outcome of the mandate. So if the mandates had been there, maybe the international oil regime would have been different, or the actors of the international oil regime would have been another ones. So that's my point here. Then, so that I say that the way in which the mandates helped to fulfill the vacuum was by integrating the Middle East oil into world capitalism. And I would say world capitalism as different of other possible ways of capitalism which could have been there during the Ottoman Empire or as an outcome of the Ottomans. So that's what I'm comparing here. And what is, I mean, the main paradox here is that one of the limitations of the non-territorial regime and non-political interterritorial mandates is that the mandates, as they were designed, they were not able to grant concessions. So that's well, the main point here is that they were not designed to grant concessions. So that may explain that why in 1921, and I'm coming back to the Cairo Conference, the creation of Iraq borders and statehood began, because they need this state, these borders and this government to grant the concessions to the international companies. So in some way, what I'm saying here is that that's a bit the tragedy of neoliberalism and mandates, that they were thinking that they were possible to have non-political, non-territorial international regimes or Anglo-Saxon regimes, but at the end of the day, they need the state to grant the concessions and probably to put the Middle East oil into the world capitalism. So from this point of view, the recreation of Iraq and by extension of the Middle East region as such is a direct result of this process. So that was our main provisional conclusion. And so then I have other thoughts. That is what nowadays it's called international economy, organization, regimes. It's inspired by the ideology of the mandates, and it's Anglo-Saxon, and we will have to define better what this Anglo-Saxon means. I'm not saying I have the right definition, but I think it's something. And as described by one of his father, which is Rappard, and explained by Jessica White, mandates were the perfect reflection of neoliberal mindset articulated around non-parallel society and one of these laboratory experiments regarding the uncivilized world. So from here, I think there is the need of defining it better again, which is international, which is this polymorphous capitalism. And as I already mentioned, the tragedy of this non-political liberalism is that they need the state. So from here, not now, but many years later, the third worldism, sorry, may be grounded on national sovereignty and national resources. So that's what I'm trying to explain here. Sorry, at some point I get a bit amiss, but those were all my main ideas. Thank you very much.
Very much, Aurelia, because it's a very complex topic and a very interesting one. And we are not used to analyzing the establishment of borders in the Middle East through this economic process, actually. And it opens a lot of new paths of research, I think. So Gonzalo, would you like to give your first reaction?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today with you. It's a real pleasure to be with really good friends and colleagues. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, Aurelia, because you gave us a very deep perspective on how it has the international oil regime, or the beginning of the international oil regime is kind of precursor of current borders in the region, and the relations between the mandate and you know, everything that has been going on since then these days. No? You stop at the point of what happens with the sovereignty of energy or natural resources, of energy resources, and that's precisely where I want to start, if you agree, because my background is not on the historical events or historical analysis that I find is very useful, and we have to better understand how history has unfolded and how those events are interrelated one with each other. So I think that's very, very interesting, and I agree with what Carmen said. It opens a lot of a very huge research agenda. But my point is more, I will try to bring the discussion to the problematic or the questions that worries us today, and try to do kind of bridge with the excellent chapter that is going to be presented later by Nida Alamat on state oil and war in Iraq. And my point, where I'm more familiar with, or where I feel more comfortable on these issues, and I try to be brief, is how do we govern those energy resources? How we have been governing this since 21, and how are we governing these energy resources today in the Middle East countries, but also how we in Europe are governing those energy flows. Are we imposing any kind of governance or this kind of thing? Why I try to talk about governance? Because one of the big, I don't know if, one of the most contentious issues when we compare the political economy of energy in more orthodox and more critical or heterodox perspectives is precisely all the debate about the resource curse, the rentier state, and so on and so forth, which is funny for me. Usually, and I'm going to try to develop this. Nida said very, and also in the book you are presenting, there is a chapter that is devoted to reject this idea of the rentier state, or at least some of the propositions they incorporate. I agree with this idea that this rentier state or resource curse narrative is quite deterministic. I mean, so if you are a poor country, you are ethnical fragmentation, and if you are Muslim, then you are there, you are forbidden, and you got oil, you will never be a democracy. So this is too over deterministic, in my opinion, because it depends. Where I differ with the more heterodox studies that this is because of imperialism or capitalism or whatever, in my opinion, is more because there is a bad management of economic policies, regarding, and I don't really believe that there is a resource course. Courses, the only way you have to solve is by magic. I don't know how we can do that in social science, but in economics, what we talk is about the Dutch disease, and diseases, yes, they have a cure. And in this part, not in the more political part of it, that I won't enter, and there are many differences. But what I really think is that many problems that we have seen, for instance, in Algeria, put an example that is close to us and that I'm more familiar with. In my opinion, it's very clear that Algeria has gone through Dutch disease. What's Dutch disease? For those of you that are lucky enough not to be economists and not to have to deal with this kind of models, this is a model developed by Corden and Neary in the 60s, 70s to explain why in the Netherlands, with the discovery of natural gas and hydrocarbons, it led to huge deindustrialization. And it's very well established, and this is not problems. You don't need data set for this. It's pure theoretical reasoning, And the idea is that if you export a lot of natural resources, then your exchange rate is going to be overvaluated. Then you are going to import a lot. You don't export nothing. You deindustrialize if you are an industrialized country. You deagrarize if you are Algeria. Your agricultural sector goes nuts, because you are unable to compete with the foreign sector because of the overvaluation of your currency. Secondly, because the boom sector crowds out activity in other sectors, so you kill diversification, you kill other sectors. Also because the public sector crowds in the private sector, so it also expels private activity and market. I know I'm talking very heterodox macroeconomics and microeconomics, but this is my point. So I really think that there is a lot to worry about Dutch disease. You need policies to prevent this. You need to sterilize with monetary policy. You need to prevent overvaluation, so on and so forth. These are very highly orthodox economic policies to prevent this. But the thing I don't like on this is, and I will close on that, is look, for instance, a country that I really like to put as an example is Indonesia. Indonesia is a geographically fragmented country, is an ethnically fragmented, geographically because it's thousands of islands, ethnically fragmented country with a huge Muslim majority. It has undergone a military dictatorship, but in the 90s, it got out of the resource curse and it has developed democracy. It's true, somebody says, oh, Indonesia is not a real democracy. Okay, it's not a real democracy. If you look, I think in the Economist Intelligence Unit, they call it a flawed democracy. There is nothing better in the Middle East. I mean, Morocco, who is the best rank, is a hybrid regime. I think something like 5. I think Indonesia is something like 6, 7. Malaysia is a very similar example. So this historical determinants that if you got oil, you came from dictatorship, you got a Muslim and fragmented population, you are condemned to be a dictatorship or authoritarian regime is not, it doesn't resist the evidence. But the more critical approach to political economy, in my opinion, doesn't got all the grasp to explain either the Indonesia or Malaysia case with a military dictatorship that has been able to combat and win a war, a conflict against communism. So both sides got difficulties, both paradigms got difficulties in explaining what's going on and what's the impact of this for the government. And I close with a commercial. We published a paper last year in the Journal of Energy Policy, trying to see, okay, we in Europe, we are saying that we want better governance. We don't want to import oil and gas from countries that are bad governed. That's what we say, because we got that provisions in our accountant directives. I mean, in our accountant directives, we say in Europe, whenever you are paying over 100,000 euros to an oil company or natural resource company, you have to disclose it. You have to say, you have to be transparent. We are paying to this guy this amount of money. So we can understand that we got a policy who got a preference for importing oil and gas and other natural resources for better governed countries. Well, these resource costs, duchies, whatever you want to call it, are less prone to develop. When we do this econometric exercise, again, very orthodox, what we find is we tend to import in Europe, when we control for distance, prices and everything, we tend to import more oil and gas from countries who got a transparency policy. For instance, they belong to the extractive industry transparency initiatives. But when we measure whether we are importing oil and gas for countries that are better governed as measured by the Natural Resource Governance Index, we find this is not the case. So we are cheating ourselves. We are not doing what we are preaching in terms of promoting the good energy governance. But when we go back, and I close on that, to the discussion between different literatures in the political economy, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because at the end of the day, depending on which strand of literature you are talking, you give a different value to this eradication or prevention of the rentier state logic. And I will close that.
Thank you. Aurelia, would you like to add something?
Yes, but okay, I was trying to fit this with what we were talking about, and my point is no, I mean, just no, that was, I mean, well, you know me, so you know what I think more or less, and what I do. Well, I did this, but it's not my usual things of my main field of work. But why I was interested on that, and that has to do with the renter state, that you start talking about the renter state. And that's why I insist that without state, there is no renter state. That was my main first point. My first point is, if there had not been a renter state, there would not have been the possibility of rent. Because the possibility of rent is, as you know perfectly well, is that there is the rent of the land, a Ricardian rent, and it's linked to the idea that the states, that is something that happened later on of this period, that the states would have the sovereignty on their natural resources. So that's the let's say the legal or the juridical basis for having the rent. So one of my ideas, it's not how to govern the energy resources in this case, but yes, the idea of why the renter states exist. I mean, the first thing is that they exist because there is an state. Okay, that was the first thing. The second thing, I always have doubts about this idea, this term, this concept of what that a good government of energy means. I mean, what's the good governance of energy, or what is the good governance of energy? I don't know if we are using the same. That means that everyone would have energy at a fair price. That means that some ones would have the energy and the others not. That means democracy. What does it mean? And it's something that I'm not sure. And answering to that, I think up to now, if we talk about oil, my thought here is that the best governance that has been in oil is cartelization of the oil industry. I don't like it, but it's the only way of dealing with, because the problem of oil is also that there is more oil than what is needed in the market. So there is some need of having a cartel just for dealing with this abundance of oil, and also to establish a price, whichever is this price. So for me, this is the good governance of oil. And so from this point of view, well, there are two ways of, well, there had been two different regimes of good governance of oil. The one that we were talking here, so that means the one that this is international regime, trying not to be very much territorial, which was this more Anglo-Saxon, if I had put, which is the one of the Seven Sisters, of course, grounded on the oil of the Middle East. That's the other one, the first one, and the second one is the OPEC one. But here, the OPEC, and I'm not saying it's something determinist, but was doing more or less the same function than the one that previously were doing the Seven Sisters. So from this point of view, Iraq, if we are talking of Iraq today, Algeria, they were performing a good governance of oil because they were fulfilling well their own role. So that's something that for me it's difficult. Another thing, it's if you have plenty of wealthy, let's put in this way, not rent, because rent it's a very economic process, but if you are really wealthy, there is some way of expending in a wiser way this money? That, I mean, this is another question. I mean, why the renter states have the Dutch, well, I would not say the Dutch, maybe let's put the resource curves. Why all of them are apparently could not escape from this idea of the resource curves? Well, I was saying yesterday, you were not here yesterday, but I was saying that it's a half and half. Okay, I was talking about Algeria, and I say, okay, there is one part that's also what I tried to explain here is this idea. What happened there? That happened that this Middle East oil, not the countries, the Middle East oil was integrated and was pumped into the flows of oil that go to the international market, whatever is this international market. That I say it's the international market probably of the world capitalism. That's what I was saying today. That's the half of the story. Of course, once this oil, and if we are talking about these countries, was nationalized in the 70s, and the rent or part of the rent of this oil belonged to these countries and the states of these countries, it could have been distributed in another way. I agree. I'm not sure if this different way would have been to industrialize these countries or to agriculture these countries, or just to spend in a better way for the people of those countries. That's what I'm not sure, but maybe that would last too long, this discussion. I don't know if I'm answer or what you talk, but more or less I think there is this point of connection. And thank you anyhow.
Okay, well, I would like to give the Turkish point of view of this story.
Of course.
Before opening the floor.
That's why you are here.
I will be very, very brief, but the idea will be, well, Turkey is not an oil state to start with, for good and for bad, and it's not a rentier state, and is, as you well know, is the successor of the Ottoman Empire, and they have so many problems to deal with before and after the First World War, that Mosul, in this case, and the oil in Mosul was one of the problems they have to face. So they have a real territorial anxiety after so many centuries losing territories on behalf of other empires in Europe. So after the to start with, yes, the Young Turks, before the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, would try to establish an independent Ottoman economy. It was not that easy at all, because after the crisis in the 70s of the 19th century, as you well know, the debt, the public debt of the Ottoman Empire was so huge that part of the economic finances of the empire was controlled directly by foreign powers through the Ottoman administration, Ottoman debt, public debt administration. So it's true that they try to create a national economy, to promote a Turkish bourgeoisie. Most of the economic companies were in the hands of Christian minorities or the Jewish minorities. So they try to promote a native Turkish bourgeoisie class. Sometimes even going against some of these Christian minorities. But actually the Mosul oil basin was a private, belonged to actually to the Sultan, to Hamid II, and the Young Turks would nationalize the Mosul's oil fundings once they came to power after the Young Turk Revolution in the 1908 of the 20th century. Well, after the First World War, I mean, there will be a national struggle. After in 1999, there was what the Turks know as the War of Independence, and they try to struggle in order to maintain all the lands that were under Ottoman control once the Mudros Armistice was signed in October of 1918. And all these, the remaining of the Ottoman army, along with Turkish militias and Kurdish militia, try to pull together all this remaining Ottoman land that was in the control of the Ottoman administration just at the end of the First World War. So it was this was their anxiety, and actually the main anxiety of this remaining Ottoman army, that as you well know was led by Mustafa Kemal, then known as Ataturk, the main territorial anxiety was in the western part of the Anatolia. It was fighting against the Greek that wanted to control this part, the oriental part of Thrace, and also the western part of Anatolia. And these were in this western part of Anatolia is where the main fights took place. After the Battle of Sakarya in 1922, it was clear more or less that the Turkish army was gaining in this part of the country. So that's why they could go to the Lausanne Treaty, not as the losers of the First World War, but as the potential winners, as the winners of the national independence fight. And it's interesting to see, and even surprising, how they could reverse the Sèvres Treaty. And as I say, came to the Lausanne Treaty, not as the losers, but as an equal, more or less equal state to deal with the last territories of the Ottoman Empire. The Mosul issue was such a thorny issue that could not be resolved actually in the Lausanne Treaty. But as I say, the main concerns of the Ottoman to be the new Turkish Kemalist state elites, the main concern was this territorial anxiety, and the economic part of the Mosul resources was more a tool in order to enhance the strength of the new state, but not the main issue for them actually. And also they were concerned with the presence of the Kurdish population in northern Iraq, and their main idea was to keep all these territories together, the northern part of Iraq and with Turkey, along with Turkey, because they presumed or were scared that an independent or autonomous local Kurdish entity in northern Iraq could be a pole of attraction for a further secession within the Turkish borders. But although this was their main concern, actually after the First World War, they were not ready, and after the Independence War, they were not ready to fight for another war. Neither the Greeks wanted to get involved in another military struggle. So both of them tried to reach an agreement. Finally, we have this treaty, the Frontier Treaty, signed in 1926. The Turks gave up Mosul, but not the oil royalties. So they agreed also in the Frontier Treaty to receive for 25 years 10% of the royalties of the oil found in Mosul. But they were given 1 year if they wanted to change their mind, so they could swap these 10% royalties of the Mosul's oil for 500,000 pounds. But I have found the very interesting articles that show how Iraq, the government of Iraq, paid to Turkey from the 30s until the 50s each year that 10% of royalties of the Mosul's oil. There were some problems. Most of the times, most of the years, the Iraqi government paid those royalties, but some problems happened when, apart from the Turkish petroleum company, after that, the Iraq Petroleum Company, other companies were granted other concessions to extract oil, and Turkish wanted also 10% to increase their 10% out of these new economic concessions. It seemed that Iraq would then increase that 10%, but they paid until the 50s, as I said, and symbolically, the Turkish state will keep until the 80s an item in its budget with the estimated money that they expected to win from the royalties of Mosul's oil. But finally, in 1986, the Prime Minister at that time, Turgut Özal, decided to remove this item as a conciliatory gesture towards Iraq. And they say the issue has been let aside. But to say here we see a different story, the story of a state that existed before. I mean, it was the Turkish state will be declared in 1923 as and it will be the inheritor of the Ottoman state, and it will try to keep an independent they will try to keep their independency towards other European powers. And I say for them, resources as the Mosul's oil was just an economic tool to enhance the sovereignty they wanted to enhance and put it in force in Anatolia. Well, it was my just reference to the Turkish story, and we could open the floor to questions. Do you have any questions, suggestion, comment?
¿Hay gente online? No sé, gente online.
I'll pose a question to Aurelia or to you also, because I mean there is much talk about all the let's say difficulties and rivalries between the West and those oil producing countries in the region, but sometimes we miss some of the intra-regional differences, or cleavages. When you were talking, I was remembering this wonderful book, The Shah and I, who explains perfectly by the Minister of the Cabinet of the Shah, how all the OPEC formation negotiations were taken from the inside. And to me, it was fascinating how the most significant cleavages were between Gulf countries themselves. I mean, the very harsh words of the Shah against the Arabs and their praise for the Israelis, for instance, this fun infrastructure that was built under secrecy, this pipeline going, between Eilat and Ashkelon by the Shah with the Israelis. Then it continued working during the Islamic Revolution for years. How do you interpret this in the overall story? I mean, because we tend to highlight the tensions and the pressures between the West and the metropole and those countries, but there is a lot to tell also between those countries themselves, probably between I mean, also Iran was the Shah was not very how to say kind with the Turkish either, in this regard. So I mean, how do you compare is there imperialism between colonists? I mean, I don't know if I can ask this.
Well, if there is imperialism between territories, well, I'm not such an expert on as you know on that. No, I think there are two levels here. First level is I would start for the other side. I mean, saying there has been, I think, more oil cooperation than it seems. That I would start in this way, in part because what I was saying before, because the oil industry, which was set at this moment, has already been there with national boundaries and without national boundaries. That's one thing. There has been, there is some kind of regional imperialism. Well, if you don't think of Arabia Saudi or even Saudi Arabia, I think it has some kind of, that's what not I was talking here, and I'm not such, I mean, I'm not an expert at all in Saudi Arabia, but I think there is some kind of imperialism. And with the Turks, I think it's completely, well, Carmen probably shortly, she will answer better than myself, but it's, I mean, I don't know if it's a thing of imperialism, but it's a thing that, like Iran, I mean, they were some kind of regional empires or regional powers, as you would say.
Iran believed of himself as an empire.
Yeah, well, because they have the purse. I mean, they have the purse, and of course, there is always this kind of competition which is there, and when things are not, once the hardest era of the Cold War, you know, which was, I mean, I don't know if they were there, but at least they were not visible. You could not see it. But once this is not there, of course, all these regional competitions for power are already. And if you think, well, we were talking just before you arrived with Olivia, we were looking at the map and think, okay, we have to talk about Kuwait. What happened between Iraq and Kuwait? This was imperialism. This was this tiny part of the Gulf Peninsula who no one knows to whom it belongs, or they belongs to themselves. Yeah, I think there is this kind of thing. And because those borders are, I mean, we have not talking about, because we didn't have time, of course, and it was not, well, it was but Mosul is the most striking case. I mean, Mosul, well, to whom it belongs, if it belongs to someone.
Well, in the case of Turkey, the idea was to, well, let's remind this famous Ataturk's slogan, peace at home, peace at the world. The idea was to consolidate the new borders of the state. So they left alone any imperialist ideas or adventures. Certainly in the 20s and the 30s, the idea was, as I say, to consolidate the borders and to keep good relations with neighbors and other European countries. For instance, Turkey started to receive the money from Iraq of the Mosul soil after the visit of King Faisal to Turkey in 1931. So yes, we see this intention of establishing good relations with the neighbors. Then after the Second World War, the politics of Turkey with Middle East was very much influenced by the positioning of Turkey in the Western Bloc. Obviously, I mean, it was very important as a key country in order to neutralize the Russian or the Soviet influence in the Middle East. It was key, as you know. So and their main concern was not on the Middle East, but certainly on the transatlantic alliance. So we will see how Turkey will develop many links with European powers, how will become part of the Council of Europe since 1949, will be part of NATO in 1952, will receive the Marshall Aid also. So it will be perfectly it will work perfectly with the Western Alliance. It's after the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that many other options will come up to Turkey to follow more creative, we can say, foreign policy. That interest on the Middle East will start certainly with Turgut Özal, a bit before, in the 80s. And we will see a lot of active economic investment and political investment on behalf of Turkey on the Middle East. But certainly we have seen a turning point in the last 20 years once the AKP came to power, because it's true that, as I say, the interest on the Middle East or this more active policy on the Middle East did not start yesterday or 20 years ago, but started in the 80s. But the most significant difference that we can observe with the AKP government is not just the active foreign policy on these neighboring countries, but also that Turkey started to take partisan roles in the conflicts in the area. And that I think is the most significant turning point. We go back to previous areas, because before the role of Turkey in the Middle East, even when it was very active, like in the 80s, was manifested more through soft power tools, like economic investment, visa liberalization. But what we have seen recently, especially after the Arab Spring, is more how Turkey sided with certain actors in the conflicts that took place after the Arab Spring, like Egypt with the Muslim Brothers, or like Syria, of course, against Bashar al-Assad. So I think that will be the most interesting change of the Turkish foreign policy in the Middle East in the last decades. This activism taking sides in the conflicts in the region, and using not just soft power but also hard power, military bases like in Qatar, or intervening directly, intervening in the Syrian conflict, etc.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, as I said, it's a very interesting exercise and quite complex, and it's true because it touches upon. None of us is expert in all the different things we're talking about, but I mean, just to do the exercise, I have two comments. I mean, going back to the 1920s, I was thinking, well, we were talking the other day. I mean, all this. I mean, if your argument is that the mandates are, or the independence of Iraq is given to allow for the concessions over the oil that the mandates didn't allow, no? That's the main point. So in that sense, you create a country, or you give independency to a country, or just to facilitate the foreign intervention in a country in a way, so which is contradictory in a way. But if we go back to that, we have to think that we are in the 1920s and it's still, okay, we have an economic obvious interest on oil, but it didn't have the dimension it has today. So they were not, I mean, we are in a moment, they didn't have idea of the income that was going to bring that industry. See, because I mean, I'm thinking of the argument. I remember Roger Owen, no, sorry, it's Eugene Roger, the author of the Arab history, that is arguing that when the British Empire, in a way, gives or grants or allows the South to take over Saudi Arabia, because they have no idea what is underneath the land. Yeah. No, and in that sense, in that moment, they are not even in there. They are interested in the oil. They have no idea what is going to make. And speaking and in relation to this, but this is a comment, and if you have any comment on that, also is that, I mean, is this contradiction that you're creating a country, but you're just creating a country to intervene in, or to access the resources of that country. So in that sense, which margin of action that country is going to have in that sense, or speaking, because I think in a way we are speaking here, and with the whole issue of development, we are speaking on the issue of sovereignty over the country's resources and destiny in a way, no? There's the whole problem of debt that Gonzalo Escribano is thinking, because the whole the problem of debt is not only that you have to pay the debt, is that that debt conditions your future, and leave you at the expense of the conditions that others are putting on you. And in that sense, you have no margin, you have no control over your destiny, in the sense. In the sense, I would like to, because it's very nice to know that I never thought of the Dutch disease having the remedy of the Dutch disease. But it's true that I was thinking in terms of this question of sovereignty, because we were talking yesterday about this idea of the problem of the rentier state, of this is not only the problem of the rent itself or the structure of the rent, but how it's introduced in the international economic order, or how to escape that. I completely agree with you, Gonzalo, on the idea of I don't either happy with the idea of determinist. And there has to be there's always a case that breaks down. There is no determinist, but there's always a case like Indonesia, others that break that course. So, but the idea is like, okay, we can have the remedy for the Dutch disease in a way, or in terms of controlling finally the depth of the inflation. But what I find more difficult, because I'm thinking, what could have they done in the 80s or in the 70s to prevent this? Or I'm thinking what they are doing now in terms of in trying to diversify the economy, but I don't see how the efforts now trying to diversify the economy are breaking their course either. And the point is that, okay, you can, as an economist, so you can put into market certain policies that control, like monetary policies, you can control that debt or that inflation, but how do you really make a change in terms of the economic structure? How do you prevent the industrialization that really needs much more capacity? Because in the moment that you have already a debt, you have no margin. So in that sense, that course is much more difficult to solve, and that leads us to the idea of that Aurelia was mentioning yesterday about the problem is that how this is inserted in the whole international economic order, or the international division of labor. That's really what is difficult to break there. It's that equation, I find.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting and challenging. And thank you, Olivia. You opened the door for my question. I wasn't sure how to enter it because it's very complicated, but you helped me a lot. Because I think, you have a challenge with your story on the first part that Olivia had brought up in terms of the mandate being created for the sole purpose of the concessions, or to facilitate the concessions. And the challenge is the case of Iran, for example. Iran was not part of the mandate system and was part of the concession system. So, and then also there's, so oil during that period was not just in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, it was in Latin America before then. And these companies were also in Asia and Latin America. So how do all of these fit into your story? Because the story you give, in a way, it has a lot of, it's a bit tricky. This is why I couldn't articulate the question, but I think methodologically, you'll have this big challenge with countries where there were concessions and long-term concessions, but no mandate. Okay. And countries in the Middle East, the Iranian case. A similar methodological challenge is about this integration into the global capitalism, or Anglo-Saxon capitalism, as you called it, because I think, the British were interested in the Middle East way before oil appeared. The Suez Canal was, was there before oil, and was, I think, partly responsible why we have this term, the Near East. It brings us closer to India. So, and that was an interest. And then the Suez Canal actually connected the region and the economy of the region to the global and the imperial economy. So the economies in the region were already integrated in a way before oil has appeared. Iraq was a crop exporter, Egypt the same. Lots of trade, and there's a book that will come out soon by Joseph Sassoon about the history of his family, which made them money and they rise to financial and the financial business and trade in the late 19th century, the Iraqi Jews, through these connections to empire. So that process was already there before the emergence of oil. And I'd second Olivia's point about, the 20s was a time when oil meant something completely different than what it meant in the 50s, I think, or later on. So that's.
May I answer? Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to you all, but in this case, because maybe I would make some things more precise than I did it. And well, I will answer both, but I will start for the easiest part. Okay, Iran, of course, has a concession, but my point here, well, not here, my point overall is that Iran, I mean, the problem that they have was not with Iran, because Iran was already there and the concession of Iran was granted much before, within, let's say, in some kind of, because there was an Iranian state in some way, government, that the Shah, that has already granted the concession to Darcy in 1901. So there was not such a problem of having a concession, because there was some kind of political structure which was able to grant a concession, which was not the case in the former Ottoman Empire, I mean, and with the territories left by the extinction of the Ottoman Empire, because there was not state and they were not a colony in the traditional sense. So there was not a single juridical political institution which was able to grant such concessions. So that's why I'm thinking, I'm not, and I will say, I'm not saying that the mandate system was made just because of oil. What they were saying is that we did that, and by chance, the oil of Mesopotamia is the perfect case that fits into the mandates. Okay, that's what they are saying. So this is a different thing. So from this point of view, I think this is a very concrete case, but this is not just any concrete case, because this is grounded on this oil, and that was the agreement of the 19th March, that all the oil contemporaneous international oil industry, which is not the whole industry, just one kind of industry, was set up. So that's what I was trying to say here. And with this also, even if you look at the shares of the Seven Sisters, I mean, Iran, it's always British, but I mean, it's in some way, it's part of it, but it's set aside. So that's one thing. I do completely, well, I agree with everything. I mean, oil, I mean, as a matter of fact, was not, they don't, well, what I know, I don't, maybe Gonzalo in this case know more than myself, but what all I have read on oil there, they don't really know it, how much oil was there. But what reading from Churchill to the correspondence and so on, what you find there is that the British were, I mean, the thing was the imperial thing. I mean, and that's what I, in my first slide, that's what I say, it's Mackinder, because there were like two, well, maybe probably more. One is the Almirante Churchill that was saying, okay, oil, but at the Foreign Office, they were not convinced of backing the Anglo-Persian oil company and having those concessions. They were not. I mean, there are 2 years of correspondence, which the Greenway, which was the chairman of the Anglo-Persian, I mean, I'm not saying it's lobbying, it's bullying. It's bullying the Foreign Office for having such concession. And at the end, how I think he has this, that they back him, because what he used is the imperial narrative, and the imperial narrative is saying, okay, I have a concession in Persia, and Persia is the way to India. So if this concession falls into the hands of a foreign interest, what you will lose is the way to India. So in some way, he is linking, in this case Greenway, something which is an economic right to a territorial concession. And that's why, well, that's my point, that's why all these strange things that happen in those years, because they are fighting. I mean, they even try before the contract of the Royal Navy, they try to convince the governor of India, say, okay, the trends of India, now you switch into oil, and the oil will be sold by this company, that they would have oil, but we don't know how much oil it has. I will come back to this. And India said, no, but this is a speculative activity we are not interested in. But the thing is that because, and that's why I quote Mackinder, because at some point what they were saying is that oil concessions are like territorial control, and this is the buffer between India and the rest, and so we have to protect it. So this is a thing. I agree in the same way that the British were interested in the Middle East before oil, but at some point something happened, and this is the thing that I cannot explain well, because I find more sources that were saying that they didn't know how much oil was in there, and they were not much convinced of oil, all but Churchill and some others there maybe, but. And what is amazing is at some point this contract of the Royal Navy with the British, when they signed this agreement, the oil was not there, and the few samples that they have, what the Admiralty is saying is that this is the quality below the standards. So the oil that they have, they thought it was not such good quality. But my thought, and it's just a thought, I mean, it's not more than that, is that someone, probably Churchill or something like Churchill, understood at this moment that the United States were becoming powerful because they had oil, and if they had the chance of having something similar, they have to bid on it. And that's why also, because there is this document that they were saying, you have to buy the assets that the Deutsche Bank has on the Turkish company, and we have to have that before the peace conference and go there with that. And they don't even know what is in there. But they think they have an ace, they don't know very much. I mean, it was like a poker game. I mean, they have this ace and they were beating, and in some way, well, they win. I mean, they don't win the full poker, but maybe they have a full. I mean, they have something at the end. So yeah, they didn't know, and in some way it was bingo. And of course, they gave to the United States Saudi Arabia, thinking that this was the worst part. And at the end of the day, it was the best part. That was a mistake, okay? But they did it, and it was done. And so I don't know if I answer. Yeah, and the other thing you say about, I agree, and I say I have to define much better. But what is this Anglo-Saxon or world capitalism? My idea is that, and that this at this moment, and I think also in the book that you have your own chapter, there is this idea that they were, this expression that they use of polymorphous capitalism, they were several national bourgeoisies, I mean, more or less, and that Carmen also talked about this Ottoman bourgeoisie and so on, who were there. But there were competing capitalism, that they were also having relations of exportation, imports, and so on. But this is not what at the end happens. And that's what I'm saying again. It's not the national industry of oil of the Middle East who was integrated into capitalism is the oil without industry, without refining, without value added, which is integrated into the flows of the international oil industry, which from my point of view is different. And that's why I was trying to say with this idea that this vacuum was filled with oil, but not with the national industry of oil, but with oil which will be part of the global chain. Now we will use this expression, but sorry, of the global chain of the Anglo-Saxon Seven Sisters. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Perfect.
Any comment? Would you like to add anything else?
Well, when you ask me, very briefly, when you ask me whether appropriate economic policies can be taken in order to prevent deindustrialization, it's not a question of deindustrialization or deagralization, it's to prevent that the tradable sector is not completely killed by competition because of the exchange rate overvaluation. So as soon as you touch upon the problem of overvaluation, of public deficit and so on and so forth, to some extent you solve indirectly the problem of deindustrialization, degradation, or whatever. But it's true that you also need some structural reforms, institutions, and so on and so forth. That's yeah, you are right that it's funny because we are here dealing with I mean, when you present something on an anniversary, someone can speak about 1921. I mean, Carmen and Aurelia could cover the history of oil in the region from the Jurassic, probably, which is not my case, which is not my case. But I think there are complementary. I mean, history shows you when these kind of policies have worked or not. I'll give you just an example for Algeria. Algeria experienced a horrible Dutch disease in the 70s and 80s. They have learned how to manage this. And when we got a price increase later on, they suffered it, but not to the same degree. Not to the same degree. They have learned to manage it better, for sure. The problem with this is once you get deindustrialized, this is a one-off effect. I mean, it's very difficult to reindustrialize, but at least you can prevent the worst impact. I mean, you don't go into the debt crisis, you don't go into the huge inflation or stagflation and so on and so forth. So it's not panacea, but there are things you can do to improve the quality of life and the welfare of the population, and they have learned to do it. It's not panacea for sure, but they have learned.
No? Okay, this is the end of the first session. Thank you very much for being here, and we have a 5 minutes break, and then we'll come back at 6 with the following table and with Nida. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Casa Árabe.
Thank you. Thank you.